I never thought a simple encounter would change my life forever. It started like any other day, but what this young man did to me left me speechless. Stay with me till the end, because this story is one you won't forget. It was a chilly evening, the kind that makes the air crisp and the city feel a little quieter. The streets were almost empty, the only sounds coming from distant cars and the occasional footsteps echoing against the pavement. I had just finished work, exhausted, my mind cluttered with the usual worries, bills, deadlines, life. I pulled my jacket tighter around me as I walked toward the bus stop. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the ground, and for some reason I felt uneasy, like something was about to happen. That's when I saw him. A young man, probably no older than 20, stood near a dimly lit cafe at the corner of the street. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring at the ground, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn-out jacket. Something about him seemed off, not in a dangerous way, but in a way that made my chest tighten with unease. At first I kept walking, telling myself it was none of my business. But something in my gut wouldn't let me. I glanced at him again, and that's when our eyes met. His gaze held a weight I couldn't describe, like he had been carrying something heavy for far too long. His face was tired, not from lack of sleep, but from something deeper, something that had drained the light from his eyes. I hesitated. What if he didn't want to be bothered? What if I was overthinking? But then, before I could talk myself out of it, I stopped. "Hey, are you okay?" My voice was careful, gentle. He blinked, almost like he was surprised I had spoken to him. There was a long pause before he nodded, but it wasn't convincing. "Yeah, just thinking." Thinking. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. I had no idea why, but I couldn't bring myself to just walk away. Maybe it was because I had been in a dark place before too. Maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to stand in a crowd and feel completely invisible. I took a small step closer, keeping my voice soft. "Do you need help with something?" He let out a small, hollow chuckle. "No one can help me." That sentence hit me like a punch to the gut. The way he said it, so final, so resigned, made my stomach drop. I swallowed, my mind racing. What do you say to someone who has already given up? I could have ignored it. Most people would have. It would have been easier to just nod and keep walking, pretend I hadn't heard it. But something inside me refused to. So instead I said, "I don't know if that's true." His eyes flickered with something, surprise maybe? Doubt? I couldn't tell. But he didn't walk away, and neither did I. That's how it started. A simple moment, a decision to stop when I could have kept going. I had no idea that small decision would change both of our lives forever. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, like something unspoken lingered in the silence. The young man shifted on his feet, stuffing his hands deeper into his jacket pockets. His eyes flickered to the ground, then back to me, as if debating whether he should say anything at all. Then, almost in a whisper, he spoke. "I don't even know why I'm telling you this," he muttered, shaking his head. "I guess it doesn't really matter." But something in his voice told me that it did. I stayed quiet, letting him find the words on his own, and when he did, what he said made my heart sink. "My mum passed away a month ago." I felt my breath hitch. His voice was flat, emotionless, but I could tell it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because he had nothing left to give. "She was all I had," he continued. "It was just the two of us. And now," he trailed off, his fingers tightening into fists, "now I don't even know why I'm still here." That last sentence hit me like a freight train. My stomach twisted, and suddenly the cold air around us felt even colder. I had seen pain before, but this was different. I could hear it in his voice, the kind of grief that doesn't just hurt, it drowns, the kind that makes every day feel like an uphill battle. And the worst part? He was fighting it alone. I swallowed hard, searching for the right words, but nothing seemed enough. What do you say to someone who feels like their entire world has crumbled? "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Everyone says that." I didn't blame him for his reaction. When you're drowning in grief, apologies start to sound meaningless. He turned his gaze toward the street, watching as cars passed by, their headlights casting fleeting shadows across his face. "I tried everything," he murmured. "I looked for help. I tried to talk to people, but no one listens, no one really cares." His words stung because I knew they were true. The world moves fast. People get busy. Everyone has their own problems, their own battles. And sometimes those who are hurting the most get left behind. But in that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't be one of those people. So I did the only thing that felt right. I listened. Really listened. Not just to his words, but to everything he wasn't saying. The way his voice wavered, the way his fingers trembled slightly when he spoke, the way his eyes held back a storm he didn't know how to let out. And for the first time, I saw something shift in him. He wasn't looking for someone to fix his problems. He wasn't asking for pity. He just wanted to be heard. We stood there for what felt like forever, the city buzzing around us, but in our little corner of the world, time seemed to slow down. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I don't even know why I'm still here." Those words echoed in my mind, and I knew if I walked away now, I might regret it for the rest of my life. So I made a choice. I wasn't going to let him feel invisible anymore. And I had no idea just how much that choice would change everything. The weight of his words hung in the air, pressing against my chest like a stone. I don't even know why I'm still here. Most people would have panicked, not knowing what to say. Some might have muttered an awkward apology and walked away, convincing themselves it wasn't their problem. But I couldn't do that. Something about this moment felt too important, as if the universe had placed me here for a reason. I took a slow breath, steadying my voice. "I don't know what you're going through," I admitted. "I won't pretend to, but I do know this. Sometimes the worst moments in life feel endless, until they don't." His eyes flickered to mine, searching for something, hope, maybe? A reason to believe that his pain wouldn't last forever. But hope is a fragile thing, especially when life has done nothing but take from you. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "It's not that simple." "I know it's not." Silence. Then, finally, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even have a home anymore. I couldn't afford to keep the place after my mom passed. I tried staying with friends, but you know how people are. They say they'll help, but after a while, you just become a burden." His words stung because I knew they were true. The world isn't kind to those who are struggling. People offer sympathy, but only for so long. Eventually, they expect you to move on, even when you don't know how. "So, what now?" I asked carefully. He let out a bitter chuckle. "I don't know. I've been sleeping in shelters when I can, but even that's temporary. I applied for jobs, but no one wants to hire someone who looks like they haven't slept in a real bed for weeks." The exhaustion in his voice was heartbreaking. He wasn't just tired, he was done. And that's when I knew I had a choice to make. I could do what everyone else had done, nod, say something comforting and walk away. Or I could be different. I glanced at the cafe nearby. "Come on," I said. He frowned. "What?" "Let's grab something to eat." His eyes darted to mine, filled with hesitation. "You don't have to do that." "I know." I offered a small smile. "But I want to." For a second he didn't move. It was as if he was trying to figure out if this was some kind of trick, if kindness like this was even real. But then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. We walked inside, the warmth of the cafe wrapping around us like a soft embrace. The scent of coffee and freshly baked pastries filled the air, a stark contrast to the cold and loneliness that had surrounded him just minutes ago. As we sat down, he finally let out a deep breath. "I don't even remember the last time I had a proper meal." That sentence broke something in me. No one should feel like that. No one should feel like they don't matter. As we ate, he talked more about his mother, about how she used to make the best pancakes every Sunday morning, how she'd sing along to old songs while cooking, how she was his home more than any place ever was. I listened to every word, not because I had to, but because he needed someone too. By the time we finished, something in his face had changed. He still looked tired. He still looked lost. But there was a flicker of something else, something that hadn't been there before. Maybe it was relief, maybe it was hope. And in that moment, I realized something. Sometimes all a person needs is for someone to show them they still matter, and that night, that someone was me. The cafe was warm, but the weight of our conversation still lingered in the air. The young man sat across from me, his fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, as if trying to absorb its warmth. For the first time that night, his shoulders weren't so tense, his gaze not as heavy. But I knew, pain like his doesn't just disappear. It clings to you, whispering in the quiet moments, reminding you of everything you've lost. Still, there was something different in his eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. Hope. It was faint, fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind, but it was there, and that meant something. As we sat in silence, I finally asked, "What do you want to do?" He blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "If things were different, if you had the chance to start over, what would you do?" He let out a small, bitter laugh. "That doesn't really matter, does it?" "It does," I said firmly. "Because even if you don't see a way out right now, it doesn't mean there isn't one." He stared at his coffee, his fingers tightening around the cup. "I always wanted to be a writer," he admitted. "Stories were my escape growing up. I used to write all the time, but after everything that happened, I stopped. It just didn't feel important anymore." I leaned forward slightly. "Why?" He hesitated, then exhaled. "Because no one would care. No one would read what I have to say." "That's not true," I said immediately. "I just did, and I'd read more." His head lifted, his eyes meeting mine with something like disbelief. Like he wanted to believe me but was scared to. For so long the world had made him feel invisible, forgotten. But I wasn't about to let him believe that anymore. "You have a voice," I told him, "a story that matters, and I promise you, someone out there needs to hear it." Silence stretched between us, and then, after a long pause, he whispered, "You really think so?" "I know so." Something shifted in him at that moment, a tiny crack in the walls he had built around himself, a small opening letting in just a sliver of light. Maybe it wasn't much, but sometimes even the smallest light is enough to guide you out of the dark. We sat there for a while, just talking, not about loss or pain or the struggles he faced, but about books, about stories, about the things that once made him feel alive. And for the first time that night, I saw a glimpse of the person he used to be, before life took everything away, before he started believing he didn't matter, and before he thought about giving up. As the cafe began to empty, I finally asked, "Where are you staying tonight?" His expression darkened slightly. There's a shelter a few blocks from here. If they have space, I'll stay there." I hesitated before pulling some cash from my wallet and sliding it across the table. "Get yourself a room tonight, a real bed, just for one night." His eyes widened. "I can't take that." "You can," I said firmly, "and you will." He swallowed hard, his fingers hovering over the money like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to take it. Then, after a moment, he picked it up, his hands shaking slightly. "Thank you." It wasn't just gratitude in his voice, it was something deeper, something raw. Because sometimes kindness isn't just about helping someone, it's about reminding them that they deserve to be helped. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I think he finally believed that. As we stepped out of the cafe, the cold air hit us again, but this time it felt different, lighter somehow. Maybe it was the warmth of the conversation we had just shared, or maybe it was the quiet realization that this night meant something more than either of us had expected. He stood there for a moment, staring at the streets ahead, his fingers still clutching the money I had given him. His expression was unreadable, like he was trapped between gratitude and guilt. "You really didn't have to do this," he said softly. I smiled. "Maybe not, but I wanted to." His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to say something else, but the words didn't come. Instead, he just nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. For the first time that night, he looked like someone who believed, even just a little, that things could get better. But as much as I wanted to believe this moment alone would fix everything, I knew better. Life doesn't work that way. One kind gesture doesn't erase years of pain, and one conversation doesn't heal a broken heart. But it's a start, and sometimes that's all someone needs. As he turned to leave, something inside me stopped him. "Wait." He turned back, eyebrows raised. I hesitated before pulling out my phone. "Take my number." His eyes widened in surprise. "What?" "You don't have to call," I said quickly, not wanting to pressure him. "But if you ever need someone to talk to, if things ever feel too heavy again, I'm here." For a moment he just stared at me, and then, slowly, he pulled out his phone, old, cracked, barely held together, and typed my number in. As he saved it, his fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from something else, something I couldn't quite put into words. He looked up, and for the first time that night, he smiled. Not a big smile, not a forced one, just a small, quiet one, like he wasn't used to the feeling but was willing to try. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And then, before I could say anything else, he turned and walked away. I stood there watching as he disappeared into the night, my chest feeling strangely heavy. Would he be okay? Would he call if he needed help? Would this night actually change anything for him? I didn't know. And maybe I never would. But as I walked away, one thought kept circling my mind. Sometimes we think the world is too big, too cruel, too indifferent. We convince ourselves that one person can't make a difference, that our kindness is just a drop in an endless ocean. But what if that drop was the one thing someone needed? What if a small act of kindness was enough to pull someone back from the edge? Maybe I was just a stranger to him. Maybe in a week he wouldn't even remember my name. But I knew, without a doubt, that I had done something that mattered tonight, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Watch till the end, because sometimes the smallest moments change lives in ways we never expect.